Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to welcome all of you to today's ANFREL assessment report on Myanmar's, the launch of the ANFREL assessment report on Myanmar's junta's planned elections. Through this report, ANFREL intends to provide an evidence-based independent assessment to the junta's planned elections, the grounding the international and regional standard for holding elections. You may know ANFREL have been engaged with the people of Myanmar almost 2 decades right now. Also, ANFREL have observed a few important elections passed in Myanmar, including the 2015 and 2020 general elections. Uh, at the same time, ANFREL also observed 2017 and 2018 by-election. Uh, in nutshell, ANFREL is one of the only international election observer also have observed the entire election cycle from 2015 to 20 in Myanmar. And at the same time, apart from observing the elections, ANFREL also have engaged with diverse of election stakeholders in the past to support the democratic aspirations of the people in the country. So with given this context, ANFREL thought it is our responsibility as the Asian election observer groups to provide our independent and also mostly importantly, the evidence-based report, the assessment about the upcoming junta's planned elections from Myanmar. And this elections widely referred as sham elections, but the idea behind ANFREL assessment is to provide to see whether these elections is meet with the international standards and the regional standards that we always observe, assess the election processes. So you may know from 2021, the military, from the day that the military staged a coup in Myanmar, the situation, especially the human rights situation, was deteriorating. We see the widespread crackdown on the fundamental freedoms, arbitrary arrests, and the detention of thousands of political opponents, journalists, and also the civil society activists. Also, we have seen all across the country the violence against the civilians, including some of the massacres and also the airstrikes up to date. And the UN and then the other humanitarian organizations also have stated that the Myanmar is in a humanitarian crisis right now. So in all this background, right now we have seen the military has called for an election, and the military is going ahead with their elections plans, plan to have the first round of the elections in the December 28th this year. So with this all situation that currently, so ANFREL will present our assessment report on these elections. And before I called upon all the speakers today who are joining this report launch. I have the messages for you all. The first message, this report launch also live streaming in our YouTube. The later ANFREL also will upload this report launch to our other social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, so that you also can have a look at it. At the same time, after ANFREL present our findings, we will also have today Q&A sessions with those who are joining in our Zoom platform. Please feel free to type down your questions whenever you have questions when we present our report findings. So later, we will have a Q&A time where our panelists will answer your questions as well. So without taking much time, let me introduce the panelists today. So we have the ANFREL chair, the Rohan Hettiarachchi. He's also the executive director of PAFREL in Sri Lanka. And we have Brisa Rosales. She is the Executive Director of ANFREL. At the same time, we also have Mr. Amal Weir. He is the consultant with ANFREL for ANFREL Myanmar program. So welcome all of you to the report launch today. So then first I would like to turn to Brisa. Brisa, I would like to invite you to the present the purpose of having this assessment talked about it, and also talked about the methodology that ANFREL has deployed when it comes to conducting this assessment. Floor is yours, Brisa.
Thank you, Taryn, for the introduction. Good morning, Cher. Good morning, Amael. And good morning, everyone, especially to all of our partner organizations in the region, especially for this. Thank you for coming for this ANFREL assessment launch of the report. But of course, again, ANFREL prepared this assessment because, of course, elections are central to democratic life, and when they are misused, they undermine rather than strengthen the societies. And of course, in Myanmar, elections are being organized under conditions that raise fundamental questions about credibility and legitimacy. And as an organization committed to advancing electoral integrity across Asia, of course, we saw it as a necessary to analyze the situation and present our findings before these elections take place. But also, going by the trends in the region, this is also part of a broader regional concern. We saw in South Asia, Southeast Asia, the different indices, ratings, data, where it show a worrying pattern of declining democratic space and reduced public confidence in elections. So, of course, Myanmar's case right now is one of the sharpest examples, but it also reflects wider challenges facing the regions. At the same time, it is also important to recognize the lived realities of people in Myanmar. Communities continue to face restrictions that directly affect their ability to participate freely and meaningfully in public life. So our work, of course, is motivated by our responsibility to reflect these realities and to contribute constructively to regional and international discussions. Just like what Tarindu mentioned, we have observed elections in Myanmar for the past years. And with that experience, we have seen both progress and setbacks in the country's democratic transition. However, of course, given the current context, ANFREL did not seek and will not seek accreditation nor engage with the Junta's Election Commission. So doing so would risk conferring legitimacy on an institution that lacks independence and credibility. Methodologically, of course, this assessment draws from nearly 2 decades of engagement in Myanmar. And for this report, we reviewed the political and legal framework established by the junta, monitored election-related developments, and conducted dozens of interviews with civil society, media, pro-democracy stakeholders, and political parties. And of course, we measured these findings against international standards, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ASEAN Human Rights Declarations, and the most recent one, the Model Commitments for Advancing Genuine and Credible Elections. Of course, the analysis will be presented in different 15 sections, which shows clearly that the elections planned by the junta do not meet these standards and cannot be regarded as credible or democratic. And of course, as we launch this report, ANFREL will issue our official statement also. And with that, let me now turn to our chairperson of ANFREL, who will deliver ANFREL's official statement on this assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brisa. Like you invited, I would like to invite Mr. Rohan Hettiarachchi, the chairperson of ANFREL, to present ANFREL statement on Myanmar's election.
Thank you, Taridu, and thank you, Brisa. First of all, apology. I have some technical issues, so I have to turn to my mobile phone. But I think you can hear me properly, right? Thank you,
Yes.
thank you. And I also wish to welcome all our colleagues, network partners, and media colleagues, and academics and diplomats, those who join with us today in this important event releasing the Myanmar the report which we have done by ANFREL. So ANFREL Asian Network for Free Elections find that the elections planned by Myanmar military junta for December 2025 and January 2026 cannot be considered credible, legitimate, or democratic. Annual assessment review the junta's upcoming the junta's elections will take place in an environment of widespread violence, restrictive laws, and intense repressions, and will feature dubious electronic voting machines, hand-picked political parties, and no independent scrutiny from media or civil society, all in the hope that the international community will accept the result and restore the relations with Myanmar. Annual assessment review the junta's upcoming elections according to established international standard and best practices for genuine democratic elections. These include fundamental rights such as freedom of assembly, freedom of associations, freedom of expressions, freedom of informations, and freedom of fear, as well as election safety, integrity, transparency, inclusiveness, and rule of law. They are enshrined in the Universal Declarations of Human Rights of 1948, the International Covenant on Civic and Political Rights of 1966, the Model Commitment for Advancing Genuine and Credible Elections, and the Global Network for Securing Electoral Integrity, Principle for Democratic Elections, Reform Process, among the others. Through 15 concise discussions, different aspects of the electoral process, and will demonstrate that the election staged by the junta in Myanmar do not align with international standards, branded by many as same elections. They suffer from severe political and procedural shortcomings and cannot serve as a pathway to peace or resolutions of Myanmar conflicts. That's I wanted to highlight. The ruthless pursuit of international and democratic legitimacy means that people are being killed and will continue to be die because of the junta's elections. More than questions of legality, these elections raise profound moral concerns given ongoing suffering of the populations. The methodology, which has explained a little bit by Brisa, of ANFREL assessment include a review of election-related developments in Myanmar and dozens of interviews with the civil society, media, pro-democracy institutions, and political parties, including several that will compete in the upcoming elections. ANFREL has been working in Myanmar for nearly 2 decades and observe, as many of our two colleagues mentioned, 2015 and 2020 general elections, as well as in 2017 and 2018 by elections. So, with that, I wish to appreciate or thanks ANFREL teams. So, they are dedicated commitments and come up with such a very comprehensive report. And finally, I wanted to emphasize that ANFREL will stand with the people of Myanmar for safeguard their democratic rights. Once again, thank you for joining with all teams to get a very comprehensive, to listen the very comprehensive report was prepared by ANFREL. Thank you, Taridu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohana. Thank you very much for presenting the ANFREL statement. That brings the most of the conclusion that ANFREL made after thoroughly going through the procedures of these particular elections. Now we would like to dig more deeper into why these elections not going to be democratic or credible elections. So I would like to welcome Mr. Amal Weir. He is the consultant who's working with ANFREL for this assessment. So floor is yours, Amal, and then we will hear more from Amal why these elections are not meeting these international standards and then the regional standard usually we set for to assess elections.
Thank you, Tarindu. Good morning, everyone. I'm sharing a presentation which should be on your screen now, if everything is all right. I will run down the 15 sections around which the assessment report that ANFREL has published is structured. I'll begin by saying that the report should already be available on ANFREL's social media pages and website. So please feel free to refer to that for the full assessment. This is an abridged version for the purposes of this release. Sorry, this is a little bit slow to switch. Okay, so let's begin with a few facts on the junta's election to make sure that everybody has a shared understanding. The elections will be held in 3 phases, with the first phase to be held on December 28th of this year. There will be 102 townships that will hold elections on that date out of 330 in the country. There will be 2 more phases that should be held in January. Dates are still to be announced. We already know from junta announcements that 56 townships will not have any kind of elections at all. The junta's elections will use a new electoral system, which will be discussed in detail later. It will also use electronic voting machines for the first time ever in Myanmar. The junta's elections are very much organized by the military for the military's purposes. This is not elections for the people, as will be demonstrated. And while ANFREL does not use the term, the elections are widely known by pro-democracy stakeholders as sham elections. And it's easy to know why. A lot of those 15 points will not be new information for people who have been covering Myanmar for a long time or people who come from Myanmar, but we do think it was important to break down these elections according to international standards so that we can provide a data set that the international community and media can refer to so that the narrative pushed by the junta can be opposed. The first point is quite simply that these elections are both illegal and illegitimate. That comes from the fact that the coup in February 2021 was not legal. There are procedures for state of emergency in the Myanmar constitution that were not followed. Subsequent decisions by the junta are also illegal as a consequence. The constitution was repeatedly ignored by the military. For instance, the state of emergency was extended beyond the allowable period of 2 years. These elections will also take place under the 2008 constitution, which was adopted in a fraudulent referendum. This constitution is fundamentally undemocratic, as 25% of all parliamentary seats in all assemblies are reserved for military appointees. And that 2008 constitution was also abolished by members of parliament elected in 2020, as the committee representing Pidangsu Luto, or CRPH, declared its abolition and replaced it with a framework known as the Federal Democracy Charter in March 2021, following the coup. So the conclusion for this first part is that the military junta has neither constitutional nor democratic legitimacy to call any elections. The mandate of the people remains with the lawmakers elected in 2020 until genuine and transparent elections can be held. A second point is that the Myanmar Election Commission, that is known as the UEC, is unlawfully installed by the junta. Immediately as the coup was taking place, 3 members of the lawfully appointed UEC were arrested and were later sentenced by a military tribunal to 3 years in prison for negligence of their duties. The very next day after the coup, the acting president of Myanmar, who was, of course, a military appointee, announced a new election commission. That election commission was led by U Teng So, a former major general, who led the election commission during the 2010 elections. And those elections are widely recognized as not free and fair. The chair of the UEC has been replaced twice since, with the last one appointed on July 31st. But each time, really, these appointees of the military junta, and they serve a purpose of legitimization. On July 26, 2021, the junta election commission also annulled the results of the 2020 election, but it does not have legally the authority to do so. That is because nowhere in the constitution or in election laws are there provisions for the UEC to cancel a posteriori election results in bulk. So the junta's election commission is not an independent or legally appointed body, but it is an organ of the Myanmar military without a mandate to hold elections. Lawfully appointed election officials were illegally arrested and jailed after the coup. A third point, which is consistent in ANFREL's assessment since the 2020 general election, is that the military's claims of election fraud in 2020 remain unsubstantiated. I'm sure that you're familiar with those claims that the 2020 elections were fraudulent, with about 30% of fake voters, according to the military and its appointed election commission. That was the basis for the coup, for subsequent reform, and that is still the narrative that the military is pushing so that they can hold their own elections. No concrete evidence has been provided since the coup for this claim of election fraud, and it remains ANFREL's informed opinion that the results of the 2020 general election were by and large representative of the will of the people of Myanmar. The military has used baseless claims of widespread fraud to circumvent due process of law, and that's just a reminder, but I think it's an important one, given the importance of those claims in the junta's narrative. A fourth point as to why these elections cannot be considered credible is that they will take place in a repressive environment devoid of any fundamental freedoms. Fundamental freedoms of association, expression, information, political participation, and more have been systematically infringed upon by the military since the coup. The laws of the country have been weaponized. Nearly 30,000 people have been arrested since the coup, with over 22,000 remaining in detention, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners. This is detailed at length in the report, but the pattern of repression is very clear. In July, the junta has also enacted a law on the protection of elections, which criminalizes any sabotage or disruption of the elections. Punishments go from at least 3 years in prison and up to the death penalty in actions that result in the death of a person. One person has already been sentenced in early September to 7 years of hard labor for criticizing the junta's elections. So this is one more tool in the arsenal. The military junta has weaponized restrictive laws to crack down on dissent and to curtail fundamental freedoms in violation of its international obligations. These sweeping attacks on human rights undermine the very foundation of the electoral process, which cannot be considered free or fair in such a prohibitive environment. Credible elections cannot exist if fundamental political rights are not upheld. Then beyond the crackdown on rights, there is also obviously the pattern of instability and armed conflict throughout the country, which is incompatible with any elections. According to data from the Myanmar Peace Monitor Project, there are at least 31,000 fatalities, including nearly 8,000 civilians between April 2022 and last month. Over 2,400 airstrikes have been recorded. Over 4 million people are internally displaced. There are credible reports of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The military has also ramped up airstrikes with an airstrike campaign in 2024 that has killed more people than during the 3 previous years combined, and 2025 is on track to have similar numbers of casualties as last year. So instability has been increasing since the coup. We're not in a situation that's improving in any way. With regard to the elections directly, some of the political parties that we have talked to have said that they are taking extraordinary measures to ensure their safety. They're very concerned about the fact that they cannot campaign safely in large parts of the country. Allegedly, some of the wealthiest political parties and candidates are purchasing bulletproof vehicles and bulletproof jackets so that they can campaign in person on the ground, which shows how concerned they are with their safety. And there are political parties that have told us quite simply that security is insufficient. So even parties that will take part in the election don't consider the security environment to be sufficient. It is ANFREL's opinion that no genuine election can take place amid the backdrop of such widespread and egregious violence. It is essential that the military junta step down and hostilities stop across the country before any elections can be considered. Furthermore, the phases in which the elections will be held will ramp up conflict. They will not pacify the country. If anything, it will increase armed conflict as elections will be rolled out. That's because territorial control by resistance forces has been decreasing in recent months after a peak in early 2025. The military is retaking several cities and contested areas. The stated target for the military's elections are the 267 townships out of 330, which is a considerable amount, of course. Again, that will be in phases, but the important point is that as phases will roll out across the country for these elections, so will military offensives. So we're seeing now, currently, the Tatmadaw, the armed forces, are bombing and launching offensives on townships where they are planning to hold elections that they either do not control or that they only partly control. So they are concentrating manpower and firepower in places where phase 1 of the elections will be held, and after that, they will also move on to other townships for phase 2 and phase 3. And it is the civilians who will bear the cost of this increased conflict. So civilian populations will bear the cost as military operations, including airstrikes, will be deployed across the country to support elections held on a rolling basis. Each election phase will create more instability and insecurity and cause more casualties. Again, we're very much seeing this in real time, but it is important that ANFREL state this. You can see here a map that illustrates phase 1 of the elections. So all the townships in purple are where the military will hold elections on December 28th. And the townships identified in red are those where the Election Commission has already stated no elections will take place. Those in gray will be included, at least should be included in phase 2 or 3 of the elections in January. But again, the details for those phases have not been announced. Sorry. A next point, which is very important, is that there is no legal minimum for the junta in terms of coverage or voter turnout for the elections to be considered successful. So that means there is no minimum number of constituencies where elections must be held. I stated the goal of 267, but that's a goal that the junta leader Min Aung Hlaing has set for himself. There's no legal requirement on that number. There is also no minimum coverage of each constituency where elections must be held. So that means even if a township is included in the phase of the election, it does not have to be the entire township. That's a practice of partial cancellation that was already the case in previous election in limited areas where conflict was taking place. But this is expected to be a lot more common for this year's election, because quite simply, the junta does not control a lot of the townships that they have called elections in. And finally, there is no minimum voter turnout required. So even a turnout under 50% will be legal according to the junta's legal framework, so that they can consider the election results valid. Stakeholders interviewed expect the junta to make use of these shortcomings in the legal framework to stage elections only in areas under the control, which in a lot of cases are very small areas in large townships, where urban areas often are controlled by the junta, but rural areas are either not controlled by the junta, they're held by resistance forces, or are actively under armed conflict. So the degree of control within the constituencies declared is very inconsistent, really. In extreme cases, that means that the junta's election commission could hold elections in only a few city wards or village tracts, and the results would still be certified for the entire township. One example of that that's very clear for phase 1 is Tedim in Chin State, where the junta only holds urban areas, but most of the township is in the control of two revolutionary forces. But Tedim will still have elections on December 28th. However, most of the population, most of the area is not expected to take part in these elections. So the junta does not need to organize widespread, inclusive, or even remotely representative elections for them to be considered valid under its legal framework. The elections staged by the junta will be held only in urban centers and areas under military control, excluding many voters and areas even within townships where elections have been allowed. On the new electoral system, it is designed to ensure military hegemony in the next parliament. So as a reminder, first past the post, or winner takes all, as it's also called, was used for all elections in Myanmar previously. This was changed in late July when new election laws were published. And these election laws introduced 50% of proportional representation for seats in both the upper house, that's the Amyota Luto, and in every state and regional parliament. The lower house will continue to be elected 100% through first past the post. So that one, the system has not changed. Something to highlight is that voters will only vote once for both elections. So they don't actually get to vote for proportional representation. It's the first past the post vote, which should be calculated for representation. So the will of the voter is only limited, even though there are technically two appointment systems. There's only one election per house for the voters. By keeping 50% of all seats in these assemblies, the new electoral system gives an advantage for larger parties, because larger parties have an inherent advantage in first past the post. And that means especially the USDP, which is the military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party, the largest party currently registered. Also, in the proportional representation components, there are a lot of constituencies where there are only 2 seats per constituency. And mathematically, that means that those seats will go to the first and second parties, to the parties coming first and second. This also gives an advantage for large parties. So in a lot of places, proportional representation isn't actually that proportional. There are some larger constituencies with more seats allocated to them. And in those constituencies, smaller parties will have a mathematical advantage. That will ensure some kind of token representation in the next assembly. But really large parties, and especially the USDP, will have the advantage in the formulas used for seat allocation, on top of having the advantage of being the most organized, the wealthiest, the best, the most widespread party across the country, and has the backing of the military. The USDP will benefit from that electoral system. So despite claims of greater representation, the junta's new electoral system favors large political parties, especially the USDP, together with the 25% of seats that are reserved for the military. This will ensure that the military and its proxies will be dominant in the next parliament, regardless of election participation by voters. There is also the junta's political party registration law, which is designed to ensure obedience from political parties. This new law was enacted in January 2023, and it forced every party that was registered at the time to re-register with the junta-appointed election commission or automatically be dissolved. The result of that was that 40 political parties, including the National League of Democracy and a lot of ethnic political parties, were banned as a result in March 2023. The new registration rules are also very restrictive, as political parties must deposit $50,000 in a bank account in Myanmar as a warranty, basically. National level parties need to recruit 50,000 members and establish offices in at least a third of all townships. These are the latest regulations that have been amended due to backlash from some political parties because the previous levels were even higher. It's much easier to register a political party at the state or region level because you only need 5 offices and 1,000 members. But in that case, those political parties can only run for election in that particular state or region, which wasn't the case in previous election laws. So this huge discrepancy between state and union level means that very few parties will be in a position to challenge the USDP nationwide. And you'll see that in the next slide as we analyze the actual registration. And also political parties can be dissolved for many reasons, which are detailed in the assessment report. I won't be listing them here, but any decision to revoke a party's registration is final and cannot be appealed. So the Junta's Election Commission has final say in who can or cannot be registered. So the Junta's political party registration law places disproportionate barriers on freedom of association, enables collective punishment, and denies the right to appeal. It provides opportunities to weaponize the law against political dissidents at any time before or after the election. And the result of that law, as I said, is that the Junta's elections will feature only handpicked political parties, really. In total, 77 parties applied to register with the Union Election Commission. 63 of them were approved, but 6 parties were dissolved. 2 of them, I believe, were dissolved in 2023, and 4 more were dissolved earlier this month, including one party that said that they met the high requirements for union level parties, but the Election Commission still dissolved them. So you can see that even if you try to register, even if you meet the high requirements imposed, there's actually no protection against the junta's decision to allow or not allow a political party. 57 political parties will run in the junta's elections. So every political party registered has already applied to run in phase 1. 39 of those parties already existed before the coup, but 18 of them are new parties. Only 6 political parties are registered at the union level, with the other 51 registered at the state or region level. Most political parties are known to be affiliated with the junta or ethnic militias close to it. We can see that because They have embraced the junta's narrative on election fraud in 2020. They are joining so-called peace initiatives by the junta. They are often signing joint statements with regard to resistance groups, calling them terrorists and such. So basically every point they align with the narrative pushed by the junta. Some of the 18 new parties are set up or supported directly by junta officials, and that's highlighted in the records of the filing. There are also several parties that are proxies for local parties to be able to compete in more than one state or region. So for instance, there's one party that has two proxies in other states because they know they cannot meet national level requirements. But those three parties actually won in different uniforms. Pro-democracy stakeholders have widely dismissed in our interviews with them parties that decided to register with the junta's UEC as co-opted by the military junta and opportunistic, so that they hope to make political gains in elections where the NLD will be absent. So that allegedly that is the motivation for a lot of them, according to stakeholders. So our conclusion here is that all registered political parties were extensively screened by the UEC and can be considered pro-military. They have been co-opted or propped up by the junta to create a facade of multi-party democracy and an illusion of choice in the upcoming elections. We have a few infographics here that you can also find in the reports. This is a breakdown of political parties that competed in the 2020 elections. So out of those, 43% are currently registered with the current UEC, but 57% of the parties competing in 2020 are either unregistered because they didn't want to register, or they tried to register and they were either rejected, dissolved, the application was canceled. So there are different reasons, but a majority of political parties existing prior to the coup are not registered. This also extends to votes in the 2020 elections. Current registered parties only tallied 26.8% of votes for P2 and Amyota Luto elections in 2020, whereas non-registered party at the time received over 73% of the votes. So in terms of representativeness, it's really a minority that those parties have. This is even more true for seats. I'm trying to switch to the next slide, sorry. So you can see here the very small slice, under 10% of seats across all elections held in 2020 were held by parties that are currently registered, whereas 90% of all seats were held by parties that are currently non-registered with the UEC. So again, 57 political parties, but representativeness is really not granted. Another point, a bit more technical, is that voter lists have been prepared from surveillance tools used by the junta. Very briefly, the Union Election Commission is preparing voter lists from population registries maintained by two entities, the General Administration Department, GAD, and the Ministry of Immigration and Population, MOIP. Those registries are used for several purposes by the junta, including military conscription. They have been updating population registries to enforce military conscription. To that effect, they have also conducted a partial census in 2024, where at least 19 million people were not surveyed because, again, the military does not control large swaths of the country. There are also credible reports that a lot of the census data was either incorrectly collected or even fabricated. So even those population registries updated by the census, a lot of the data is known to be incorrect. There are people who have been avoiding conscription and as a result have been trying to skirt population registries, have relocated. So the accuracy of those population registries is really questionable. And that is the basis for the voter list. It's not the only source, as The UEC is also doing door-to-door voter registration, but most of the data is really coming from those registries. There are also concerns that the voter list will be used by the junta in some ways to control election outcomes. It's hard to assess for sure because nobody has access to the voter lists, and there's no independent scrutiny of them, but that is a strategy that we know they have done in the past. So a conclusion here, the use of data collected by the junta to enforce conscription and impose surveillance of its population to prepare voter lists goes against international standards. It raises concerns that these lists could be used to either exclude, intimidate, or monitor voters during the elections. There's only a few more parts. If I can go to the next slide. There we go. There are also concerns over the military's control of advanced voting processes. Historically, advanced voting was less transparent and more vulnerable to fraud than the rest of the electoral process, and that's especially true among military personnel. Myanmar migrant workers abroad are worried that the junta could pressure them into voting through restriction of embassy services and intimidation of their family members back home, according to our assessment. There is a window to register for advanced voting abroad. That window was extended by over a month because the registration rate was very low. So the UEC has extended it. I think it was initially a 5-week window, and that has now become a 10-week window to register. So the junta is really eager to get people to register for advanced voting, but the people are not so eager to do so. There are also changes in the election laws so that advanced votes from outside of Myanmar and from inside Myanmar but outside the constituency, which includes most military personnel, will be counted and announced before election day, which is highly unusual. The Election Commission may also use internally displaced voters to hold elections remotely in places controlled by resistance forces. That's a concern that was highlighted during our assessment. So that raises possibly the opportunity to have elections remotely in places where which are affected by armed conflict, but there are a lot of people that relocated into an area controlled by the military. The military could have those people vote in IDP camps, for instance, and still declare successful elections. That's something that we'll have to see, but that is a possibility. Overall, the integrity of advanced voting under the military-appointed UEC and other relevant state agencies are questionable in the absence of procedural safeguards and independent scrutiny. We now come to electronic voting machines. There are 2 slides on this. The first issue with them is that they were adopted by the junta in a top-down manner. The first prototypes were unveiled in February 2023. The junta justifies the EVMs, electronic voting machines, with lower cost of operation, faster results, and elimination of voter fraud. The junta also says that these EVMs are built in Myanmar, but there are very strong resemblances with EVMs used by India. And there's a probability that the EVMs are actually made in whole or in parts from parts that they have purchased from India, although that is not transparent. We suspect this in part because there are links between the Myanmar military and Indian weapon suppliers, which also happen to manufacture EVM. 55,000 EVMs will be produced according to UEC data. However, procurement details have not been made public in any regard. The core issue here is really the top-down decision of adopting EVMs in a very complicated context without any consultation of stakeholders. EVMs should be adopted gradually through legal reforms, pilot testing, and political consensus building, as was the case in India over 2 decades. So Myanmar's Election Commission has forcibly introduced EVMs without prior consultation of stakeholders and with little transparency around the procurement. While machines are believed to have been sourced in whole and part from India, despite claim of domestic manufacture, the key concern lies in the openness and clarity of the process. And for illustration purposes, you can see here, these are the EVMs used by India and developed by India. And you can see here illustrations from the junta. They look very nearly the same. The components seem to be the same, the layout seem to be the same. So there are very large queues that, again, these EVMs probably come from India in some aspect. The other core concern about EVMs is that they raise risks for electoral integrity. So the software and transmission protocols that the UEC will use for voting machines is unknown for anyone but them. No civil society organization, political party, media, or independent authority was invited to review the source code used. There will be no access to transmission and tabulation of results. So the entire tallying of votes and announcement of results will be done without any kind of scrutiny. Stakeholders interviewed also believe that the EVMs are introduced to control and, if necessary, to inflate voter turnout and election results according to the outcomes desired by the military junta. International standards for the use of technology in elections dictate that the adoption of voting machines should be accompanied by more and not less transparency, and that's obviously not the case here. There is also none of the above or no vote option on the EVMs for voters, so they have to choose a party. And in the election laws, that's also criminalized to file a false report saying that the paper audit trail issued by the machine does not match the actual votes. And that's very difficult, of course, to assess whether it's true or false, but the law criminalizing voter complaints is not a good sign. And the conclusions in the next slide, that Myanmar's electronic voting system lacks transparency and any transparency measures and independent oversight. In this context, there are serious risks that EVMs could be misused in ways to undermine electoral integrity and place voters under pressure rather than serving as safeguards. The absence of a no-vote option combined with the criminalization of voter complaints further restricts space for freedom of expression and opinion. The very final point, which is obvious to anybody covering Myanmar, but again needs to be clearly stated, is that there will be no credible election observers allowed in the junta's election. Min Aung Hlaing has already declared that international election observation groups have been invited. However, the groups that have expressed interest are not recognized or independent election monitors. Internationally, these include the Cambodian People's Party, and then the countries of Laos, Russia, Belarus, and India. For Russia, Belarus, and India, this election observation could take place either bilaterally or through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the SCO has a track record of observing controversial elections and rubber stamping results. We also expect the Election Commission of Thailand to send representatives under a bilateral relationship that they maintain with the UEC, and possibly other election management bodies from the region could attend the elections. The junta will also deploy friendly civil society groups as token domestic observers. Some of them have already expressed interest. However, regardless of the number of observers claimed by the junta, genuine election observation is not possible. Again, because the election protection law sentences anybody saying that the elections are not free, fair, or transparent to 7 years in prison. So the foundations for credible election observation are just not existent. So again, no established domestic international election observation group will participate in the junta's elections. Countries supporting the junta will send representatives to legitimize the electoral process, but no independent scrutiny will be permitted by the UEC. And again, ANFREL will not observe, will not participate in the elections. So this concludes the presentation of the 15 chapters. Very briefly, the overall findings, as highlighted in the executive summary and in a statement by Rahana earlier, boils down to 2 points. First, that the elections carried by the junta in Myanmar do not meet international standards and cannot possibly be considered credible or legitimate. And a second point that goes hand in hand is that people are actively being killed and will continue to die because of the junta's elections and its insistence to hold elections in a complicated context. Thank you very much. That will be all for me.
Yes, thank you very much, Amal, for presenting all the findings, those 15 points that ANFREL wants to highlight when it comes to this junta's elections. And also, just another reminder, so you can ask your questions in Q&A section if you are joining us with the Zoom platform. At the same time, you can download right now this complete report from ANFREL website. And also, if you are joining via Zoom, this report also available in the resource lab. So you can download from there as well. So without taking due time, let me again invite Brisa to present the recommendations from ANFREL. So these are the ANFREL's recommendations for different stakeholders assessing the situation in the country and this election.
Yeah, thank you, Tarndo. I will not take so much of everyone's time so we can finish on the dot. But of course, the purpose of these recommendations is to ensure that this assessment informs action. And what matters now is how the international community and the region shall respond. So with our recommendations, we are highlighting three important stakeholders. One, of course, is the international community, including the ASEAN. Of course, we would want to highlight the governments and institutions that have already spoken about being cautious about the junta's planned elections. And at the same time, the positions have been clear that the planned elections will not resolve Myanmar's crisis and they should not be given recognition. And this principle stances must be sustained and strengthened. Of course, for the ASEAN, together with its partners, they can play an important role by insisting that any electoral processes in Myanmar must be based on respect for the people's will as expressed in 2020. So we encourage ASEAN, of course, to use its platforms, including the 5-point consensus and regional dialogues, to engage more directly with pro-democracy stakeholders and to press for an end to violence before any meaningful political process can take place. Of course, to pro-democracy partners and civil society, we encourage continued support for Myanmar's pro-democracy forces, elected representatives, ethnic organizations, and civic stakeholders who are working toward inclusive governance despite the immense challenges. Civil society in Myanmar also needs sustained international support to continue providing assistance, dialogue, and strategic advocacy. And of course, one of the important stakeholders with all of this, to the media, we encourage balanced reporting that explains not only the process of junta's planned elections, but also their wider implications for human rights, freedoms, and the aspiration of Myanmar people. Of course, in closing, ANFREL wants to reiterate that the 2020 electoral mandate remains valid until credible, inclusive, and transparent elections can be held. Recognizing this mandate is essential for Myanmar's democratic future and for safeguarding electoral integrity in the whole Asian region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brisa. Now we would like to open the platform for your questions. Please type down your questions in the Q&A section so then our panelists can answer those questions. Let me just go to one of the questions mentioned here already. We have a questions about could you please clarify about the voters only get one vote? Or I thought there will be two votes or for one candidate. So they just like basically he wanted to get the clarification whether it's just one vote or two vote. I think Amal can further clarify on that matter.
Yes, thank you for the question. So no, in the elections for Anyota Luto and State Region Luto, the two types of parliaments that are 50% first past the post and 50% proportional representation, voters will not get two votes. That was confirmed by the UEC, that voters will only vote technically for first past the post. And from those first past the post results will be calculated proportional representation. So that already is confirmed by the UEC. There will not be 2 elections for each of those assemblies. However, it might be confusing. So I need to clarify that there are several elections taking place, as you know. So voters will get to vote 3 or 4 times because there is the lower house, the upper house, the state or regional parliaments, and in some cases, depending on the voter's ethnicity, ethnic affairs ministers in the state or region parliaments. So 3 or 4 votes, but 3 or 4 voting machines. There'll be 1 voting machine per election. But again, Amyota Luto and state regional parliaments, only 1 vote, even though the electoral system is twin. For a direct comparison, this was the same thing in Thailand in 2019, where you would derive proportional representation outcomes from first past the post. So if you want a comparison, but again, this is clarified. It was a bit of a surprise, but we can confirm this is the case.
Thank you, Amal. I also would like to ask a follow-up question with that. So since there will be use of the voting machines in some of the polling station, as far as we understand. So in that case, when it comes to different elections for the let's say, for example, Lamito Luto, Pito Luto, or the regional Lutos, there will be different election, so those EVM machines, right? So
Correct.
if you can clarify.
Correct. The UEC has released template layouts for the polling station, and the layout is basically identical to previous election, where voters will vote. I believe it's first P2 Luto, then Amyota. Maybe I got the order wrong, but there will basically be a station for each election, and each station will be an EVM. So each election will have a different machine. That is clear also. And election laws provide for both the use of electronic voting machines as well as paper. So while we expect the voting machines to be used, it is possible for elections to be held in some places on paper for logistical needs. Just want to highlight that as well.
Yeah, we have another question. I think Brisa can answer that question. So that's the question. It asks about ANFREL, whether ANFREL is going to advocate with some of the countries who will likely to support these elections. So what is ANFREL's advocacy plan, or yeah?
Actually, yes. So that will be the continuing activities after this assessment, because we want to present in different countries, and there will be international briefing, open and closed door, in order to advocate for this assessment, and of course to uphold what is in the report right now. So there will be continuous activities.
Also, we have a question whether it is possible to get the presentation. So actually, you can download the entire report from our website. But at the same time, if you have any questions, like this is for all of our civil society, from the international organizations, from the diplomat community, or even the journalists. So if you need any further clarifications on what is in the report, please feel free to email us. You can reach us out anfrel@anfrel.org or civicspace@anfrel.org. So please feel free to email us to one of our email address. So if you need any clarifications or any further informations with regards to this report. And I think so far, those are the questions we have. So if we do not have further questions, I think we can conclude the today's report launch, as well as I mentioned earlier. So whenever you have questions, please feel free to reach out ANFREL. I will mention again these email addresses: anfrel@anfrel.org or civicspace@anfrel.org. So from those email addresses, you can reach us out. So thank you very much, Brisa, Amal, and also our chair, Rohana, for joining us with today for this report launch. I think that's conclude today's report launch. And then we as ANFREL, we are looking forward to, as Brisa also mentioned, to keep working with the civil society at the other pro-democracy groups to advocate more around these elections and support continuously as what we did in the past for the democratic aspirations of the people of Myanmar. Thank you very much for joining us.